Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you very much also for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here at last. Buzzwords, you mentioned buzzwords. I'm hoping that by the time I finish, they'll be less buzzy and more meaningful, but let's see how we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to imagine life in a few years' time. The day starts, you're woken up by an alarm when your wearable device detects the optimum moment in your sleep cycle. It has already alerted your kitchen that you'll be down in 15 minutes, at which point your coffee maker has your espresso ready for you, and another machine has made your breakfast. Your journey to work, if you have to make one, is in a connected autonomous vehicle, and during the ride, you look at the early morning mails which have been prioritized by an intelligent mail client, and that's also prioritized your working day. It doesn't even occur to you to look out of the window, and in fact, the vehicle may not even have windows. Your breaks at work are spent in a sleep pod which produces just the right ambience for you to have a refreshing 15-minute sleep. For the evening, an intelligent digital assistant searches the calendars of your friends for availability and then books the most suitable, mutually convenient location for you to have dinner, play golf, or whatever. All day long, your wearable has been monitoring your heart rate, your cortisol levels, your blood sugar, and many other things, and on that basis proposes what you should eat for dinner and when you should sleep. And because the programming has been designed using behavioral science, you accept the recommendations. This pattern of existence is designed to maximize your productivity. But does it? And if it does, then for how long before we begin to feel that something is missing? Now, that's not a new thought. Sci-fi writers have been writing about this kind of thing, about societies driven by machines for decades, and it never seems to end happily. Bring up a slide. So this slide is, it comes from a report written by Arthur Anderson, for anybody who can remember them. In 1985, it was a prediction of the future. I won't read it all. It was a prediction about cities in 2015. The key point is that they were predicting that city centers would be inhabited only by people who couldn't afford to move out. Now, of course, it's the opposite of what happened. And now, why were they so wrong? Because suburbs are boring. There's something about cities that speaks to a deep need within people. So we need to ensure that cities can meet those needs. A real life story. 15 years ago, a friend of mine had to catch a bus in London on a rainy day. When he got to the bus stop, he saw a young lady without an umbrella and offered to share his. They got chatting, and a few years later, they got married. Today, there are apps which show exactly when the next bus is going to arrive so that people can delay their departure from home until exactly the right time. And weather apps, which tell us whether the rain is just a passing shower or a longer downpour, potentially offering the option to delay a journey until it has passed. With today's tech, my friend would have been a little bit more productive, but he wouldn't have met his future wife. Now, what sort of trade-off is that? So the concept of a smart city is based on pervasive connectivity and the embedding of sensors into the urban fabric so that patterns of use of city systems can be monitored and proactively managed accurately and in real time, and that's important. The byword here is efficient, and don't get me wrong, it's vital we have this because it's an essential part of getting rid of waste and reducing carbon emissions. But we need to do it in the right way. Now, you may have seen this quote before because it's over 50 years old. Technology is the answer, but what was the question? That's what Cedric Price asked in 1966. And it's a question that comes up at almost every smart city event I go to. What is all this technology for? What's the problem it's answering? In my work at Innovate UK, we don't talk about smart cities at all, but instead we talk about urban living because we recognize that cities are fundamentally about people. And the challenge is to improve how they live. So today I'd like to go beyond that. And in response to Price, invite you to imagine that the question is, how can cities become places where all have the opportunity to achieve their full potential, or to self-actualize, to use the term made famous by Maslow, and its hierarchy of needs you'll recognize on the slide. I'd like to offer some key steps towards that, and I acknowledge that none of them are simple. So the first one is thinking of cities as systems of systems. Now, all cities want to achieve sustainable economic growth. They want to offer a good quality of life to their citizens and workers, and they want to deliver both of those things while reducing environmental impact and increasing resilience. City authorities recognize that they can't achieve those things while continuing to deliver their services through silos. And why not? Because complex urban challenges don't fit neatly into silos. Instead, they are messy. So we need to stop thinking in boxes and start thinking about the best way to deliver outcomes, such as reduced energy usage. To give you one example, from a buildings level, in many countries you have air conditioning as standard features of homes. Those same homes also need hot water. So on the one hand, you're taking heat out, and on the other, you're creating it. It would make a lot of sense if the two things were linked, but they rarely are, because heating and cooling are thought of as different systems. This sort of realization led Innovate UK to look at urban living. We started by investing in solutions to integrate data from different city silos so that city managers could see a bigger picture. Currently, it's possible for an individual to exist on up to 20 different city databases without a unique identifier. And that makes things very inefficient. And we've looked at the innovation possibilities that come from integrated city data and many more things. This impacts us at a human level too. You'll know that the term ecosystem comes from ecology, and in nature things are interconnected. We are part of nature, but the way we run our cities doesn't recognize that. Nearly a century ago, Max Weber wrote about the iron cage of bureaucracy, the increased rationalization inherent in society which traps individuals in systems based purely on efficiency, rational calculation and control. And it's my belief that this is a major cause of the increasing levels of well-being, of mental illness that we are seeing in cities. And an approach to smart cities which privileges efficiency over human experience will only make that worse. Number two, create spaces which encourage interaction. In London, for those of you who've been, you may have recognized that famously the locals don't talk to each other on the underground, except when it breaks down. When the norms are disrupted, we are prompted to connect, and that has meaning. As social animals, the need for connection defines us. In a smart city, where everything is seamlessly integrated and failures are rare, the chances to make those connections are reduced. So we need to find new ways to provoke those connections. One of the companies that I work with through funding them is Yellow Brick, and they've been working with Clear Channel, who are one of the world's largest providers of advertising screens. And they've been exploring how screens at bus stops can be used to promote engagement with city authorities and with other citizens. Bristol's Playable Cities, which you probably can't see very well on the second slide, has a whole range of projects which are designed to stimulate interaction with the city in new ways. Protect and enhance natural environments. Exposure to nature not only makes you feel better emotionally, it contributes to physical well-being, reduces blood pressure and heart rate, muscle tension, and the production of stress hormones. Natural environments are also places vitally where people can disconnect. Recognizing this, London will next year become the world's first national park city. Now this map on the slide shows all the green spaces and waterways in London. Together they make up almost 50% of London's area. And the National Park Initiative will enable Londoners to make the most of this. The experience of nature is a vital part of being human and a necessary part of becoming sustainable. When you feel part of something, you stop destroying it and start nurturing it. Taking new approaches to planning. Cities are complex systems, and a property of such systems is emergence. In other words, things happen which are difficult to predict. In Singapore, it's said that every blade of grass is planned, and yet, several years ago, when an old light manufacturing area was set to be demolished, 3 organizations from education, government, and industry collaborated to turn one block into a startup hub. Now, today, that's spread across several of the neighboring blocks, and the network of incubators and accelerators that are there form the heart of Singapore's technology startup ecosystem. In London also, and I think in other parts of the world, a new plan tech subsector is emerging, which is giving city authorities and citizens a way to try out their plans in virtual reality before implementing them. There are a number of promising UK companies such as Improbable, Simudyne, and Block Builders who offer these services. Now, the last one, Block Builders, actually used Minecraft and data from the UK's mapping agency, Ordnance Survey, to give citizens an immersive experience of proposed plans and the chance to influence them. Taking that kind of approach to planning gives citizens a greater stake in their cities and leads to the design of environments which are more conducive, I think, to self-actualization. Welcome new people, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the immigrants, the students, the ones who bring new ideas and sustain your city, as has been the case for the world's greatest cities for centuries. They bring the perspectives of an outsider and see opportunities that locals have become blind to. They bring new foods, new styles, new music, and new ideas. Last year, I spent a week between 3 of China's tier 1 cities. Now, what China has achieved is amazing. There's a lot of energy and dynamism in how the economy is developing. But when I went on to Hong Kong, I experienced something completely different. There were African street musicians, Indian shopkeepers, Western business people, and more. It has an incredible entrepreneurial energy which you can feel. I think the diversity makes a significant difference. Celebrate your heritage. Research shows that time spent in an environment with history enhances well-being. It's been said, I can't remember who said it, but it's been said that no one goes on a holiday to cities which were built after 1920, and I can believe that. I visited Tehran several years ago, where nearly 100 years ago, the newly installed Shah tore down most of the city's historical buildings in the name of modernism. And you can feel, if you've been there, it feels a little soulless as a result. Historical buildings, monuments, and parks connect us directly, I think, to where we have come from. And citizens who live and breathe that are likely to have higher levels of self-esteem. 7, open your city's data. It helps citizens make more informed choices and can also help them create enterprises. And the creation of this data is funded by taxes on citizens. So citizens ought to have the right to use it anyway. But it isn't that simple, of course. How this is done and the rules around what gets collected and released from whom and through what mechanisms require careful consideration. Citizens should be involved in shaping those decisions. And beyond the democratic principle, there isn't always an obvious business case for opening data. You can look around the world, see that valuable things have come from open data in other cities, and surmise that the same will happen in yours. But in these times of tight city budgets, that isn't enough. So an approach needs to be designed to ensure that the value from releasing that data is properly distributed. Good example in this space is CityMapper, a startup in London, which took data from Transport for London to build an app that helps Londoners travel around their city more efficiently, using time, cost, and carbon and calories as their parameters. It's a free app, and it's been so successful that the additional data generated by its use has led CityMapper to start a physical service, a bus route which better reflects the travel patterns of real Londoners. They're working now in 39 cities across the world, and are also working with others to help them open their data in an effective way. Involve your citizens. Asking what people want isn't always useful. As Henry Ford famously said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Asking people how something makes them feel yields much greater insight. In Kochi in India, a few years ago, I was taken on a tour of an old part of the city by a former mayor. This was a location for one of the smart city initiatives, and as I listened to him explaining how free area-wide Wi-Fi would be available, I looked at the area behind him, and I saw that it was strewn with discarded food wrappers, drinks cartons, and other rubbish. And I had quite a visceral reaction to this. Why was that rubbish there? It was there because the people who put it there didn't feel they had enough of a stake in the city to care about it. Free Wi-Fi won't solve that. The people need to be part of the process of defining what happens in their city. Now, the image on the slide is of something called the Citizen Canvas that's been created by the London startup Design for Social Change. It's been inspired by the common understanding that was created through Osterwalder's business model canvas. And the founder of Design for Social Change, Priya Prakash, developed this as a collaborative change tool to help various groups of stakeholders work together to arrive at a common vision for what a smart city should be following a citizen-centric design process. I know it's been used in various cities around the world very successfully. Number 9, take a pluralistic approach to education. People learn differently and have different abilities and needs. And in cities often come from different backgrounds, so equality of opportunity demands that this is acknowledged. And cities will reap the rewards of doing that, not least by continuing to attract new people. And of course, a well-educated citizenry contributes more to the economy and overall to society than a poorly educated one. Presence of leading research and teaching institutions also draws in talent and sows the seeds of innovation, but that isn't the reality of every city. Peterborough in the UK, for example, identified that it's the largest city in the UK without a university and made compensating for that part of their future city program. by focusing on skills development. And it worked. At the Smart City Congress in Barcelona in 2015, they were awarded the title of the world's smartest city. And finally, measure progress differently. A study carried out by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton found that money only buys happiness up to $75,000. After that level of income, money has no real impact. And in that context, it's interesting to observe that as one goes up Maslow's hierarchy, money is less obviously a factor. We need an approach to measuring city performance which recognizes this. There are a number being developed. This one shown on the slide is based on the idea of integrated reporting, based on the 6 capitals concept. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, Cape Town and Johannesburg already produce integrated reports based on this principle, and they publish them. So it's a quick canter through some ideas of where I think smart cities need to be going and how technology potentially can help us to improve the way people live in cities. Ladies and gentlemen, no one moves to a city because it's smart, but one that thinks about self-actualization, I'd live there. Thank you very much.